Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Simon, and I am so happy to have you here today on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. On this show, we take different life cycles and we explore them both financially and emotionally. Although we might be somewhat general in some of our discussion, we would love to hear from you, make it more relevant and more personal. So please do reach out. You can reach me on my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial, or you can post comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or any of the other platforms you might be listening on. One of the things that is inevitable is we're going to have frustration as part of our everyday lives. There's situations in which we don't get our way. That is part of our life. There's inefficiencies due to bureaucracy that can drive you crazy, and unfortunately also is a part of our lives. Group all of this together when you're fighting for your loved ones, and it becomes possibly the scariest and most infuriating experience possible, let alone the fact that this could be the court system you put your faith in to protect your child. I hear from many divorce professionals how the system is broken, or you may hear that you don't go to the courts to get justice. Now, I know that I am painting this with a very, very broad brush. I do get that. But at the same time, this sentiment is real. And today I am honored to have two amazing guests on the forefront of reforming family law courts with me today. We have Tina Swithin, who is the creator of One Mom's Battle. Welcome back to the show, Tina.
Thank you.
And we have Danielle Pollack from the National Family Violence Law Center at George Washington University. And hopefully we will have you back too. So both of you join me today to share kind of the state of the courts, the wonderful work that you guys are doing, sharing your experiences and your insights on how to keep this momentum moving forward. So Danielle and Tina, thank you so much for joining on the show. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Honored.
So both of you have a passion and a drive in sharing your message. And obviously our passion comes from our journeys that we've gone on. I'm going to ask if you guys can share just a little bit about your story and where your strength comes from.
I'll go ahead and start. So 2009, I walked into the family court system as a mother with two very, very little girls, and just believing that the court system was there to act in the best interest of children. That's the message we hear. And I quickly discovered that my soon-to-be ex-husband at the time, that his parental rights truly did trump my daughter's safety and well-being. And so that started it's actually 12 years, even though we terminated his parental rights 2 years ago. We are still in family court. I'm actually back in court in August, yet we don't even have a case. So it's this nightmare that I can't seem to escape from. I'm actually one of the lucky ones because my children are safe, but that is not, I am somewhat of a rare unicorn in the family court system. But I always say, for someone to hear our story and consider us lucky speaks volumes about the brokenness of the system.
Danielle, if you would help us with your background.
Sure. So I'm the policy manager for the National Family Violence Law Center at GW Law, which is based in DC. And I had been working in policy in a different area for many years in Europe. And then I relocated to New York City, and I had the unfortunate experience of having to be in family court in that system, and was just appalled by the system failures and gaps. And so I made a promise to myself and my child that once we got out of the court system, that I would use my policy expertise and apply it to fixing, or at least ameliorating, some of the problems in the family court system. And so that's what I've been working on the last about 7 years. And then, of course, we had this big success. We just got a big federal reform law passed this year called Kayden's Law, which we can talk more about later.
Yeah, no,
we're
definitely going to cover that. And I think, firstly, I want to say thank you, because so many people go through a divorce and it's a battle and they just want it to be over, and then they want it behind them. And I don't call it, the new generation. I call it this passionate generation of divorce professionals, or, family law professionals who have been through it and want to take their experience and make it better for others. Too many people want to put it behind them and leave it behind them. So thank you for what you're doing, because obviously we can see what's happening, and we're going to speak more about what's happening in the advances that you've made to help children as we get through more questions, more parts of the show. But before we really get into Kayden's law and kind of the meat of the topic, I'm going to ask if you can kind of set the stage a little bit in terms of, there's this term child maltreatment, and I'm not sure everyone really knows what that is. I'm going to ask if you can define that a little bit, and then share some statistics, if you would, or areas around domestic violence and the impact that has, if you would.
Sure. So when we say child maltreatment, we're talking about child physical abuse, child sexual abuse, also psychological torture, really profound harms to children that have lifelong impacts. We know from the ACEs study, which tracked thousands of children, that the impacts from child maltreatment can really cause profound harms emotionally, financially, et cetera, across a lifetime. And the CDC's done a lot of looking at sort of what's happening to children who have experienced maltreatment. And over a lifetime, they've estimated that the cost is over $800,000 per child who was maltreated. So it's a huge cost. That's per child. And of course, thousands of children experience maltreatment every year. And the Department of Health tracks, when children are found to have been maltreated, and each state reports on that every year. And the overwhelming majority of the people who are responsible for causing the maltreatment is a parent. So it's not really a stranger very often. It's usually a parent or a family member. And so then when you go into a divorce situation or separation and you share a child and one of the parents is causing harm to the child, it's very difficult in the family court system to get protection, because the parental legal rights are quite strong for each party. And then there's some gender bias in the courts too that we've looked at with our empirical studies from coming out of GW law.
And unfortunately, I think too often we look at cost as a financial term, which are staggering. I mean, that 800,000 number is incredible. I mean, there are people that don't earn that amount in a lifetime, let alone have to spend it just on one item of their life. But, we cannot lose sight of the emotional costs and the loss there as well, which is not always as easy to measure or to quantify, as maybe a financial cost is sometimes. So, I wouldn't be surprised as well if there are so many cases, because it's not a tangible financial number that kind of rides under the radar and isn't even identified often as well.
Absolutely. And they can measure, I mean, some of the studies have measured that, regarding like the emotional and psychological harm, and how a child who becomes an adult, how productive they are in society in many ways beyond, financial measurements. And they do struggle with oftentimes addiction. They have higher rates of heart disease and obesity. They struggle to keep consistent jobs and family life. So there's, it emanates out over a lifetime for children who have experienced maltreatment. And a lot of it is preventable. And that's kind of the work that we're doing, is to, try to target when the abuse and the maltreatment comes to light and someone is kind of bringing that message to the system and saying, help, my child's getting hurt. It's an opportunity for our systems to really intervene relatively early and stop that maltreatment from being prolonged. Because with each incident or each dose, what they call dose of maltreatment, both severity and the number of times that the child is maltreated, it of course increases and multiplies the lifelong harms. So family court is a place where it's being announced, the child's being hurt, let's help them. And unfortunately, they're not doing a great job yet of intervening adequately and really truly protecting the child from further harms.
So one thing that I always share with my clients is that the earlier you kind of identify a problem, or the earlier you work on something, the quicker you can resolve it, or maybe hopefully prevent it from getting worse. Are there warning signs that people should watch for? Do you see, kind of somebody doesn't show violent behavior, but maybe becomes more violent? Or on the flip side, is there research that maybe shows violent tendencies have a propensity to escalate? Or what are some of the things that somebody should be watching for up front, maybe if they are worried this might happen?
Tina, do you want to take that about a narcissistic partner?
Yeah,
and then a little about overlap with children.
Yeah, what I found in my experience, and now I've had a decade of connecting with others all around the world, is that my story is not unique in that the abuse that I suffered during the relationship magnified. The day I walked into the court system, it exploded. It became so much worse than what I thought I was making the right decision by leaving, because that's the message we hear in society is do the right thing, leave. But what happens, we all know these situations are about power and control. And so when someone leaves an abusive relationship, that need for power and control doesn't just mysteriously vanish. And in most cases, it actually intensifies and it becomes very dangerous. And what so many of us come to find out is that, this person, really had no interaction, no relationship with the children during the relationship. And all of the sudden, there's this mask that comes on for the court, and the children are used as pawns. And then you have the court system that is saying, well, we don't care what happened in the past. They give everybody a clean slate many times. And they want to see you encouraging the relationship between the abuser and your child. And if you don't do that, you are equally under a microscope, sometimes even more so. And when you aren't encouraging a relationship between the child and your abuser, you risk losing your children. That is very much the reality. And your children in these dynamics become pawns and weapons for the unhealthy parent. And so as a protective parent, as a mom, your hands are tied to protect your child, which is what nature intended for you to do. And they're tied by the court system.
I think somebody who's used to power and sees it going away, not being able to control, that becomes almost desperation for them to cling to that control. And I think that's also a little bit of what you're saying there. The other thing that I think there's a bit of a cautionary, a lot of these people, it's about the perspective of how people see them. And whether it's the courts, whether it's their neighbors, whether it's their friends, they can't see, it can't get out that they are controlling or they've been abusive or anything like that. And so they, as you said, they have this kind of mask they put on sometimes in order to show a different behavior that what's been going on for 20 years behind closed doors, potentially. So I think, again, planning becomes a big one. There are resources like the two of you out there. If somebody believes that they are in a situation where they need to get out to protect themselves, to protect children, don't do it alone, please. There are resources you can reach out to. If anyone needs to, they can always reach out to me. I can put them in contact with you guys as well, or other people as well. But this is an area where you've got to do it right sometimes. You can't kind of get a second chance at doing it always. And so please, I'm just putting that out there for people, that they know that there are resources out there and they don't have to do it alone. So, not long ago, by the way, I think it was a couple months ago, NBC covered the family court crisis. So, if it's not a massive blow up in society, that when a organization like NBC covers something, it's something that's been going on for a while. Why are the family courts ignoring the requests of a parent when there's violence and the potential for harm to come to a child?
I mean, the legal system in general, it tends to be sort of archaic, behind what we learn in social science and medical research. The legal system in many areas is kind of the slowest to catch up in many ways. And then in family courts, you have this additional layer of this history of women and children certainly having less legal rights than the father of the family historically. And we carry a lot of those concepts or ideas with us unconsciously. So there's a lot of bias in the courts and just in our thinking in society. And the predominantly when it's a mother and a father and a child is being hurt in the family for like severe child maltreatment, it's mostly perpetrated by a male, not always, but it's more dads than moms doing these kind of severe harms to children. And as you guys both said before, these perpetrators they're oftentimes very charismatic. They're grooming everyone around them, including the adults, not just the children, because they're always thinking ahead of how to protect their reputation, protect their power, protect their position. And so the courts really, I think, they're not up with the latest research. They haven't caught up. They don't have adequate training on kind of what we know in the medical and scientific field around how trauma and maltreatment manifests and harms children. And they tend to err on parental rights over children's rights. So we're working to try to get a shift towards more of a focus on children's human and civil rights above parents' rights when abuse allegations are raised. Because really, if you're not moving to protect the child first and foremost, you're putting them in harm's way in many, mmany cases. But there's kind of this default towards minimizing abuse and, diminishing it and saying, oh, well, that, no one would do that to their own child. It's so horrible. Who would sexually abuse their own child? I mean, it's horrifying for everyone to think about, for example. So it's much easier to sort of move to a concept that, oh, probably that person made it up because the other parent made up the allegations of abuse because they're being vindictive or they're angry at their ex, or they're trying to just break the child away from, the other parent. And there's a concept that's been used a lot in the family court since the 1980s called alienation. And this concept is very often raised by the accused abuser in our family court system. So one party, usually the mom, not always, the protective parent will, raise an abuse allegation or concern, or the child will disclose abuse. And then the other party who's accused will cross-claim alienation or alienation-like behaviors. And that concept, even though it lacks scientific support, has been readily adopted by the courts and applied and really viewed as like an extreme form of child maltreatment, even though it is not. There's no diagnosis for it. It's not a medical condition, etc. Although its proponents are always trying to promote it as a valid scientific form of maltreatment to children. And it's just, there's no way that it can parallel, child sexual abuse or child physical abuse. I mean, we've had cases where children's are getting their bones broken, or we have forensic evidence of child sexual abuse. And these experts who come in and testify on behalf of the accused party will make claims that this is all just parental alienation. It's all just made up by the other parent who's being vindictive. And that is causing more harm to the child than anything that this protective parent is raising. And so, unfortunately, this concept, this alienation concept, has really permeated the courts the last 45 years or so. And there's a big cottage industry that's servicing the courts, these experts that come in and testify on behalf of these accused abusers.
So I'm going to throw out a little scenario here. I'm a judge. A parent brings up that there's endangerment to a child. So as a judge, I've got to know, is this person trying to find favor with the court and get a better verdict, or is this legitimate, right? I mean, that's kind of, I'm guessing, what the judge is looking at. How would a court evaluate an accusation of potential violence or danger for a child? What are the steps that they would need to take to say, I don't know which one this is, right? I need to figure this out, though. What are the steps that it's supposed to take?
It's very difficult for courts to assess this. It depends on the type of maltreatment. It depends on if the litigants can afford an attorney. Oftentimes the accusing party or the protective party will not have enough resources to hire an attorney, and they will go pro se, which gives them a huge disadvantage against the other litigant who oftentimes can afford an attorney. And so the court is hearing whatever the litigants are presenting, but before that presentation happens, there are a lot of kind of what they call neutral parties. So custody evaluators, forensic evaluators, a lot of parties who are engaging the litigants, sometimes engaging the children, and then making a kind of assessment, and they're reporting to the court. But it really depends on the type of maltreatment. So, for example, if a child discloses child sexual abuse, a report goes in, like to their pediatrician, for example, or to their therapist. A report will go into the child hotline. Each state has a hotline, and that report goes to the child welfare system. And then the child welfare system makes an analysis. If they think that the report is valid enough, they think that there's real concern, then they open a 60-day investigation. And then child welfare will send a caseworker out, meet the child, talk to the parents, talk to other parties, and they will make an assessment. And that assessment at the end of 60 days is, helps the courts kind of determine whether there's real risk or not. And that if the child welfare system thinks that there is, harm, they will make an indicated report. And sometimes in that process, if child sexual abuse is disclosed, the child will also be forensically interviewed at a child advocacy center. And then they also will make a determination whether they think there's that, the claim is valid or not. If they think it's valid and there's lots of evidence, sometimes it will be referred into the criminal system, which has a much higher burden of proof. It's hard to prove compared to the civil system that children are being heard. So it's much less common that child abuse cases are referred to the criminal system because it's a higher burden of proof in that system. So what happens instead, a lot of times these cases move into the child welfare system. And then if the child welfare system thinks that the abuse is valid, it will go into the dependency courts, where they the main thing that they're looking at there is child maltreatment, child abuse. If they can't get to a finding in that system, then the case moves into the space that we're talking about, which is custody court, private custody court. So the state there is not a litigant. It's just the two parties, the two private parties, which is where you get some of the problems, because that system is really kind of looking just how to divide up children. And a lot of the courts and the judges in that system, they don't even want to think that child abuse is in their system. Their default thinking is, if the child abuse were real, it would be either in the criminal system, the police would be taking care of it, and the DA, or it would be in the child welfare system in the dependency court, where they handle child maltreatment cases. And they like to think that's not happening here. Like if that were happening, one of those systems. But in fact, in many, many of the cases in the private custody space, there's a lot of child abuse happening. And there's a lot of overlap, as Tina was kind of referring to earlier. When the abuser is abusing the adult partner and the adult partner leaves, the abuse does not diminish.
Right.
Just transferred to the child. And like you were saying, Hirsch, the abuser starts to feel loss of control as their abused partner is leaving with the children. That's the most dangerous time for victims to leave, because the abuser is feeling a loss of control. And the way that they are able to regain this sense of control is very often in private custody litigation, by regaining access to the children and then harming the children, because it's torturous for the proactive party, usually the mother, to know that they have to send their children to this party who they know is abusive because they've lived the abuse, and just wait for the children to come back, hopefully not harmed, hopefully alive, hopefully not abused further.
I'm imagining, unless it's blatant, a small kid doesn't want to disappoint a parent in general. So they're going to say, daddy or mommy are just disciplining me. I did wrong. Or, there's sounds like a lot of subjectivity that can come into this. And it also seems like a relatively cumbersome process for somebody to go through, all in 60 days as well, which is not a lot of time when you take into account weekends and schedules and every the workload that people have. I do need to get to a break, but I do want to come back and talk about some of the positive things that are happening through all of this. Kayden's Law, we mentioned earlier, is one of them. But right before that, Tina and Danielle, can you just share what is the easiest or quickest way for people to touch base with you should they want to reach out and learn more?
For me, it would be One Mom's Battle website or admin@onemomsbattle.com.
But for me, I'm at the National Family Violence Law Center at GW Law. You can just go to our website, or you can write me an email, dpollack@law.gwu.edu.
Great. We will be right back. 2 minutes. Thanks. It looks like our commercials have frozen up, so I'm just going to keep going. I do want to recap where we are at this point. We've spoken a lot about the situation. Danielle and Tina, you just got a great job from Jody Palmer. Thank you for listening, Jody. And I'm sure you are finding it fascinating, but also disturbing at the same time, like I am. And I hope you're excited to hear some of the positive things that are happening. But before that, I just want to talk a little bit or recap a little bit. We are on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. We are talking to Danielle Pollack from the National Family Violence Law Center at George Washington. We also got Tina Swithin, who is the founder of One Mom's Battle, with us. We spoke a little bit about the statistics, and I hope I can read my handwriting because I'm having trouble. But we spoke a little bit about the statistics and that staggering $800,000 number that came out with that, a little bit of the impact of domestic violence and the turmoil, it even taking the finances out of it, the turmoil it can cause in somebody's life on the obesity, the heart disease, the can't keeping a job, the things that you had mentioned, defining maltreatment and what people are doing. And as you said, I think it's nobody wants to believe, let alone, can buy into sometimes that a parent could do things to a child that we hear about, and it's very disturbing. But unfortunately, it is real, and we need to, highlight it. I think sometimes too often things are brushed under the carpet kind of thing because we don't know how to deal with it or we don't want to deal with it, and that doesn't make it any better. We spoke a little bit about violent tendencies and behavior, how NBC covered this, and I think this goes straight into, recently the president signed into law an act called Keeping Children Safe from Violence Act. And I think if I can call it the colloquial name being Kayden's Law. So you at the National Family Violence Law Center actually co-drafted this with the congressman from Pennsylvania, Fitzpatrick. So firstly, thank you for the effort and congratulations. That is a very positive move. I'm going to ask you to describe it because you'll do it way better than I can. But who was Kayden? I have seen several videos of Kayden's mom, which really is heart-wrenching. But who was Kayden, and why is the newly enacted federal law such an important legislation for children who are at risk?
Yeah, thank you. So Kayden was a little girl. She was living in Pennsylvania with her mom, and her mom was abused by Kayden's father. He had a long abuse history, a criminal record. He had a lot of violent acts that were documented that everyone knew about. And Kayden's mom went into family court to litigate custody with her father, and the court granted him unsupervised contact so he could be alone with Kayden. And on one of the visits, he bludgeoned her to death and put a plastic bag over her head. He murdered his little girl. She was 7 years old. And this was after many, many, many requests by the mom to help protect Kayden and keep her safe from this man who had a long violent history. And she was found by her grandfather and Kathy, the mom's current husband, Brian. So after that happened also in my district. I live in Pennsylvania. Kathy, Kayden's mom, began sort of collaborating with me. I had been working on this issue for some time and putting forward some sort of model laws to try to improve the system. And after Kayden was murdered, she really became vocal and wanted to speak out. She went to speak with the governor. We brought her to a policy committee hearing in our district in Pennsylvania. And politicians and lawmakers really became, I think, more aware of this problem. And they were very sympathetic to the situation. And so they made commitment both at the state level and the federal level to help improve the system. So I brought in the policy expertise. Kayden's mom really brought the Kayden story to the public. And then the Pennsylvania lawmakers, both state and federal, really worked hard. And we're still working at the state level to finish passing Kayden's law at the state level. But this year, as you said, Hirsch, at the federal level, we were able to pass a national law. It's part of the Violence Against Women Act, and it's named after Kayden. Her full name is Kayden Mancuso. And if you want to see the NBC nightly news coverage that Lester Holt did, you can just Google Kayden Mancuso and NBC nightly news, and you can find it. It's a 2-part series they did.
Yeah, it was, I think, very enlightening. As you said, this is a 7-year-old girl, and what happened is just unbelievable. You almost can't believe it or don't want to believe it, but this is unfortunately things that are happening and why we need to protect our children, and I think as children, we often mimic the behaviors of adults that we see and we experience what they do. We want to be like our parents or adults that we think are, so to speak, cool. Often these are not healthy behaviors. They can be healthy. They sometimes are unhealthy behaviors. And the federal government is kind of finally recognizing, I think this act really highlights that they are recognizing things that are going on that need change. So what implications does this have for domestic violence, for the victims, including children? And how, hopefully, will this impact this kind of cycle of intergenerational learning and violence that we've seen?
I'll defer to Danielle.
Okay.
That's a heavy topic, I know. Heavy question. Not that the others haven't been, but I think there's a lot in there. So
There's a lot in there. Absolutely. So custody law is a state matter. So each state makes their own custody law. They're similar state to state, but they have some variation. But it's up to the states to make their custody law how they want. So there's not a lot we can do federally, but what we can do, we have done with this federal Kayden's law, and it it will incentivize states. It provides millions of dollars of federal funding to the states to improve their state custody laws in a few ways, 3 or 4 ways. So we're working with the states now, the state lawmakers, to help do this. We're providing technical expertise so that they do it with the intent as it was written for the federal Kayden's law. So the 4 things, just very quickly, that it asks states to do so that they can get the federal funding, is train their court personnel, train their judges and the other actors who are making decisions in these cases when abuse is alleged. Train them on the facts of child abuse, child sexual abuse, child physical abuse, trauma, course of control, perpetrator and victim behavior, etc. So there's about 8 categories they have to train their judges on. So we're hoping that judges then will be able to make more accurate decisions and be able to better assess kind of who's telling the truth or what is going on in this case, etc. It also asks that the experts who come in and provide testimony on abuse are actually experts in that type of child maltreatment, so that we can kind of keep out some of these theories that are not scientifically supported that I made reference to earlier. So if you're going to come in and testify as an expert to the court and educate the court about what is happening with this child, maybe why they're disclosing or why these behaviors are happening, etc., you really need to be an expert in that type of child maltreatment. And you need to show that you've worked with victims of domestic violence or child abuse over an extended period of time. So you can't just be someone who shows up. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that we ask that the states include in their custody laws that the state courts will consider a history of abuse, because many times when litigants like Tina or whoever the protective party is comes in and says, I've been being harmed by this person for a long time. I have protection orders. He has an arrest. He has a conviction. A lot of times in custody courts, the response from the court is, that's not relevant to their parenting. They may have hurt you, the adult, but that still doesn't mean that they're not a good parent to the child. And so we ask that the courts consider a history of abuse and record of abuse when they're making decisions around who should have the child and how and what the arrangements should be. And then the last thing that Kayden's law does is it limits the reliance on what we call reunification camps or reunification treatment. And this is kind of a sinister part of the family court system that also has grown from these cottage industry that's servicing the courts. Right. And the concept behind reunification, and a lot of these junk science experts come in and testify that, oh, this child who says they're abused or afraid of the parent, they just need reunification. And then that will repair the damaged relationship that's not really caused by actual child maltreatment. It's probably caused by alienation, this kind of counterclaim that the accused party usually uses.
And magically will change past behavior and all the rest.
Yes. And so these are very expensive. They cost tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes just for like a week. The parties have to pay for them. And essentially what it is, it's pushing together the accused parent or the parent that the child is resisting. The abuse is not always explicitly alleged, but the child is either afraid or really resisting, doesn't want to go to that parent. And these reunification camps or treatment, sometimes the child has to get on a plane, go to another state. Sometimes some of these are in the woods. Sometimes they're carried out in hotel rooms. They're highly unregulated. And it's usually there's a counselor, although they're usually not mental health experts, that's present. And they're basically pressuring the child to bond with this parent that they've accused of abusing them or they're afraid of. And then the child is kind of oftentimes not told to talk about the past, not to talk about any abuse, and to just move forward. And then when they come out of these reunification camps or treatment, the child is oftentimes so scared to say anything. Oftentimes they're threatened. They'll say, if you don't get along with this parent that you're resisting, your mom could go to jail, or you'll never see your mom again, or you'll have to go into foster care and you won't see either one of your parents. So children are afraid, and so they'll stop disclosing the abuse after these quote unquote treatments. And then the abusing parent, or the accused parent, will come back to the court and say, see, the child is not disclosing abuse anymore. They're okay with me. I should have more custody. And the courts then oftentimes grant that accused party more custody and take away custody from the protective party. So Kayden's law will restrict the courts from doing this. And it will make a requirement that the person who wants the reunification treatment, before that can happen, they will have to prove that this treatment is safe and effective for the child, it's beneficial for the child, etc. And that will be very difficult for most of these outfits because they're not safe and effective for children.
So I only have time for one more question, and we've got to do it pretty quick, unfortunately. But I think the one that I want to leave everybody with is, what advice do you have for someone who feels unsafe or feels they may be facing a situation that can turn violent? What would you advise sorry to do it in about 60 to 90 seconds.
Do you want to take that, Tina? Do you want to
You
go?
first of all, some of the things I wish I would have known back then, how we present is so important. We are under a microscope, and a victim of domestic violence, it doesn't present as well as a narcissist or an abuser. And so, really getting self-care and with a therapist. And then I wish I would have documented thoroughly what was happening to me in detail through journals, through records. I wish I would have, gathered financial documents and all of those things, because you are not prepared when you walk into the court system, and aligning with resources and agencies who truly understand these dynamics and can guide and help. Every situation is so unique, but there are common threads that run through all of them. And Danielle, I'll let you add anything else that organizations or anything that.
Yeah, I would just say, if you think your child's being hurt, the first place to reach out is really the pediatrician. And if your pediatrician is a generalist and they can't make an assessment, ask for a referral to a specialist and they can refer you to a pediatric specialist in child maltreatment. And then from there, you want the pediatrician or the medical expert to report to the system. If you call directly, it's viewed oftentimes as suspicious, unfortunately. So it's best to have a medical practitioner make a call if, in fact, there's concern that your child's being hurt.
So, yeah, we try to cover years of work in about 40 minutes. So I know, and there's some things I would have loved to spend another 40 minutes just on some of these questions. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up. But firstly, thank you both for what you do. Tina, I know yours kind of evolved into now literally having tens of thousands of people read your stuff, or you help them when you post anonymously to get support for the people that are following you. And I can tell you, I know people personally who have been inspired by your journey. One of them went pro se on her own because she couldn't afford an attorney. And so you have definitely made significant impacts. Danielle, the organization you work for, obviously getting federal laws passed to help also. Thank you for all that you guys both do. Sometimes words aren't enough to thank when it comes to our children and what you guys are doing. So thank you both. I'm going to ask just one more quick time how people can get in touch with you. And then I really do have to wrap up.
I'm going to plug, instead of my own personal contact information, the National Safe Parents Organization, which has been started by a whole group of advocates across the country. Join us. It's going to take a village.
I would second that. The National Safe Parents Organization is kind of the place where we have a national umbrella of advocates coming together around these issues to create system-wide change and help implement Kayden's law at the state level. You can also find me at the National Family Violence Law Center at GW Law, and I think my email is right there. You can reach out to me. Thank you so much.
I'll plug both your websites because they've both got very good information. So DaniellePollack.com or OneMomsBattle.com. Please go there. I am Hirsch Sermon, your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please reach out to me as well. You can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Please do reach out with questions for me or either one of my guests. And thank you, CC Schatz, behind the scenes, making the magic happen that we could get this information out. I look forward to all of you joining me on my next show in 2 weeks. Thank you so much. Have a great week.